She didn't bond with him because he said the perfect words. She bonded because for a brief moment she felt emotionally safe without needing to explain herself. And most men never notice when that moment happens. They think attraction is built through appearance, confidence, status, or chemistry alone. And yes, those things create attention. They create curiosity. But bonding is different. Bonding happens much deeper than attraction. It happens in the nervous system before it ever reaches language. This is where most men misunderstand what they're seeing. A woman can enjoy your company, laugh at your jokes, text you constantly, even feel physical attraction toward you, and still remain emotionally detached because attraction alone does not create emotional attachment. Safety does. What's actually happening beneath the surface is far more psychological than most people realize. There's usually a moment, subtle, almost invisible, where her emotional guard stops working the way it normally does. Not because she falls sudden, but because something inside her quietly relaxes. And once that happens, the bond forms faster than most men expect. You can often see the shift afterward if you know what to look for. Her tone softens slightly. Her reactions become less calculated. She stops performing emotional control every second. The pauses between messages feel more natural. The eye contact changes. Not more seductive, more present, because emotionally attached women don't become more theatrical. They become more psychologically available. But the strange part is, the thing that creates this bond is usually not what men think. Most men assume women bond through excitement, through intensity, through constant pursuit, through impressiveness. They think emotional attachment is triggered by making her feel overwhelmed with emotion. But emotional bonding rarely begins in emotional chaos. It usually begins the moment she stops feeling the need to protect herself around you. And protection is something many women carry constantly without realizing it. Not because women are manipulative, not because they're complicated, but because emotional awareness develops differently for them socially and psychologically. From a young age, many women learn to monitor emotional environments carefully. They notice shifts in tone, facial expressions, reactions, energy changes. They become highly aware of emotional risk. Who feels safe? Who feels unstable? Who feels emotionally demanding? Who feels emotionally draining? So when she first meets a man, part of her mind is unconsciously scanning for emotional pressure. Can he handle discomfort? Does he become distant when uncertain? Does he need validation constantly? Will his mood become her responsibility later? Focusing on what she does instead of why she does it. When she pulls away slightly, it's not always disinterest. Sometimes she's observing emotional consistency. When she becomes quieter, she may not be losing attraction. She may be checking whether your behavior changes when attention decreases. And this is the moment most men accidentally destroy emotional bonding without realizing it. Because the second uncertainty appears, they begin performing. They try harder, text more, push conversation, seek reassurance, increase pressure. But psychologically, this communicates something very specific to her nervous system. It tells her your emotional state depends on her responses. And the moment a woman feels responsible for stabilizing a man emotionally too early, her emotional openness starts shrinking instead of expanding. Not because she wants power, because emotional pressure interrupts emotional safety. This is the hidden dynamic most men never see. Women bond fastest, not when they feel chased relentlessly, but when they feel emotionally understood without being emotionally managed. That difference changes everything. A woman becomes deeply attached when she feels she can exist around you without constantly regulating your emotions, your ego, or your insecurities. Because in that environment, her nervous system slowly exits defense mode. And once defense mode lowers, emotional bonding accelerates naturally, not dramatically, quietly. That's why sometimes a woman suddenly becomes closer after a simple conversation that didn't even the man involved. He thought nothing major happened, but internally, something did happen. For the first time, she felt emotionally unguarded without consequences, and that moment is far more powerful than attraction alone. What most men call chemistry is often just emotional stimulation. Emotional bonding works differently, because a woman can feel excitement around a man and still never trust him emotionally. She can feel attraction and anxiety at the same time. She can crave attention from him while still keeping her emotional walls fully intact. This is where the confusion begins. Men often measure connection through visible signs. How much she texts, how fast she responds, how physically affectionate she becomes, how often she wants to see him. But women often measure connection through internal emotional experience. how safe she feels expressing uncertainty, how judged she feels during emotional shifts, how much self-protection she still needs around you. And what's actually happening beneath the surface is far more subconscious than intentional. The female nervous system is extremely responsive to emotional consistency, not perfection. Consistency, that distinction matters. A man who appears confident one day and emotionally reactive the next creates unpredictability. And unpredictability forces emotional caution, even if attraction remains high. Because emotionally, women do not relax into inconsistency, they monitor it. This is why some men confuse intensity with depth. A relationship filled with emotional highs and lows can feel addictive, passionate, dramatic, but still emotionally unsafe underneath. And over time, emotional exhaustion replaces emotional bonding. Real bonding usually forms in quieter moments. Moments where she notices that your emotional state doesn't collapse every time. Reality becomes uncomfortable. When she disagrees with you and you remain calm, when she becomes distant briefly and you don't punish her emotionally, when conversation slows down and you don't panic internally, these moments communicate emotional stability. And stability has a powerful psychological effect on attachment, because emotionally stable behavior tells her nervous system something very important. I do not need to control this environment to feel safe. That realization changes the entire dynamic. This is also why women often become unexpectedly attached after moments where a man shows emotional understanding without trying to immediately fix, dominate, or redirect her emotions. Most men are trained to solve problems quickly, to restore certainty, to remove discomfort. But emotional bonding often deepens when a woman feels emotionally witnessed instead of emotionally managed. That's a major difference. For example, when a woman expresses stress, confusion, or emotional frustration, many men instinctively move into correction mode. They offer solutions immediately, logic, advice, strategies. But psychologically, she may not be searching for solutions in that moment. She may be unconsciously asking a deeper question instead. Can I exist emotionally around you without becoming a problem you need to solve? This is where most men misunderstand female emotional behavior entirely. Women often attach to emotional environments before they attach to individual traits. That means she remembers how she feels around you more deeply than the exact words you said. Did she feel emotionally tense? Did she feel evaluated constantly? Did she feel pressure to maintain your attention? Did she feel emotionally safe enough to be imperfect? These questions shape attachment far more than most men realize. And interestingly, this is also why emotional bonding can happen suddenly, after one small interaction. To the outside world, nothing dramatic happened. But internally, her nervous system detected emotional safety where it expected emotional pressure. And psychologically, unexpected safety is powerful, especially for women who are used to managing emotional tension in relationships. Many women unconsciously expect men to become reactive under stress, defensive during disagreement, distant during emotional discomfort, needy when uncertainty appears. So when a man remains emotionally grounded instead of emotionally demanding, it interrupts her expectations completely. Her mind stops preparing for emotional instability, and the energy she normally uses for self-protection slowly shifts into emotional openness instead. This is the hidden transition men rarely notice. Bonding does not begin when she becomes obsessed with you. It begins when she stops feeling emotionally alert around you, because emotional alertness prevents vulnerability. And vulnerability is where attachment grows, not forced vulnerability, not trauma dumping, not emotional dependency. Quiet emotional permission, the permission to relax psychologically. That's why women often become deeply connected after moments men consider ordinary. A late-night conversation where she didn't feel judged, a disagreement where you didn't become cold afterward, a vulnerable moment where you didn't use emotional pressure to gain control. These moments seem small externally, but internally they reshape emotional trust. And once emotional trust begins forming, her behavior changes naturally. Not because she's trying to impress you anymore, but because emotionally she's beginning to include you inside her sense of safety. That is the moment bonding truly starts. Once a woman begins emotionally associating you with safety instead of pressure, her behavior starts changing in ways most men completely misread. And the reason they misread it is because they're still looking for obvious signals instead of psychological patterns. This is where most men misunderstand female attachment entirely. They assume bonding looks dramatic, more affection, more compliments, more visible excitement. But emotional attachment in women often appears far more subtle at first. In fact, some women become calmer when they start bonding deeply, less performative, less emotionally exaggerated, less focused on impressing you constantly. Because psychologically, performance decreases when emotional safety increases. Think about it carefully. People perform most when they fear losing acceptance. So when a woman starts relaxing emotionally around a man, she often stops managing every interaction so carefully. She stops trying to create a perfect image every second. Her communication becomes more natural, more emotionally honest. And ironically, many men interpret this shift incorrectly. They think she seems less excited now. She used to try harder. The energy changed. Yes, the energy did change, but not necessarily in a negative way. What's actually happening beneath the surface is that emotional vigilance is decreasing. Emotional vigilance is exhausting. Early attraction often contains a level of tension. She's observing you, reading your reactions, watching for emotional inconsistency, trying to understand whether connection with you feels emotionally safe or emotionally risky. But once bonding begins, that constant internal monitoring slowly softens, and this creates several hidden behavioral shifts. One of the biggest is emotional transparency. A bonded woman usually becomes less edited emotionally, not because she suddenly becomes irrational, but because she no longer feels the same need to emotionally curate herself around you. She becomes more honest about stress, more open about fears, more comfortable showing imperfect emotions. This is important because vulnerability in women rarely begins through words alone. It begins through reduced self-protection, and reduced self-protection only happens when her nervous system believes emotional punishment is unlikely. This is why emotionally reactive men unintentionally stop bonding from deepening. The moment a woman senses that honesty will create emotional retaliation, guilt, distance, criticism, or pressure, her emotional guard immediately returns, not consciously, automatically. Because female attachment is deeply connected to emotional consequence, if vulnerability feels dangerous, bonding slows down. This is also why many women test emotional stability indirectly, not through manipulation the way some men assume, but through observation. She watches what happens when situations become uncertain. If she responds slower one day, do you become passive-aggressive? If she disagrees with you, does your warmth disappear? If she expresses emotional discomfort, do you become defensive? You're focusing on the event itself, instead of the emotional information she's gathering from it. Women often study emotional reactions more than emotional statements, because reactions reveal emotional regulation, and emotional regulation predicts long-term emotional safety. That's why a man who appears charismatic but emotionally unstable often creates attraction without deep attachment, while a man who feels emotionally grounded can create profound bonding without needing constant performance. This dynamic explains something many men experience but rarely understand. Sometimes a woman becomes significantly more attached after seeing a man remain calm during difficult moments. Not dominant, not emotionally detached, calm. Because calmness under emotional tension communicates internal stability, and stability creates trust inside the nervous system. Remember, emotional bonding is not purely logical. It's biological too. When a woman feels emotionally unsafe, her body remains slightly guarded, even if she consciously likes you. Her nervous system stays alert for emotional unpredictability. But when emotional consistency continues over time, her nervous system begins conserving less energy for protection. That's when attachment deepens quietly. This is why bonded women often start including a man naturally into their emotional world. She references him during stressful days, thinks about his reactions unconsciously, feels calmer after hearing his voice, wants emotional closeness without always needing stimulation. Notice the difference. Attraction seeks excitement, bonding seeks emotional regulation, and this is the hidden pattern most men never see. A woman who is emotionally bonding with you is not always searching for intensity anymore. Often she's searching for emotional steadiness, because emotionally steady people create psychological relief, and relief is deeply addictive to a nervous system used to emotional unpredictability. That's why women don't always bond strongest with the man who creates the most excitement. They often bond strongest with the man whose presence quietly reduces emotional tension inside them. The man around whom they no longer feel the need to emotionally defend themselves every minute. And once that association forms deeply enough, attachment stops being a conscious decision. It becomes emotional instinct. The biggest mistake most men make is assuming women bond emotionally the same way men become attached visually or physically. but female attachment is usually far more contextual. It's influenced by emotional atmosphere, psychological safety, behavioral consistency, and subtle emotional experiences that happen repeatedly over time. This is why many men become confused when they do everything they were taught should work and still fail to create deep emotional connection. They pursue harder, show more attention, give more compliments, become constantly available, and sometimes the more they try to secure attachment, the more emotionally distant the woman becomes. Not because attention is bad, but because emotionally desperation and emotional pressure feel very different from grounded presence. This is where most men misunderstand what women actually respond to beneath the surface. Women are highly sensitive to emotional intention, not just behavior itself, but the emotional energy underneath the behavior. For example, two men can say the exact same words. One feels emotionally calm and secure internally. The other feels anxious, needy, and dependent on her reaction. The words may sound identical, but emotionally they feel completely different because human nervous systems constantly read emotional congruence, especially women. A woman often notices when attention feels transactional instead of genuine, when affection feels connected to expectation, when kindness quietly carries emotional pressure underneath it. And this creates an important psychological distinction. True emotional bonding cannot grow in environments where she feels responsible for maintaining your emotional stability. This is the hidden reason emotionally dependent behavior weakens attraction over time, not because women lack empathy, but because emotional dependency changes relational polarity psychologically. Instead of feeling emotionally free around you, she begins feeling emotionally responsible for you. And responsibility creates pressure. Pressure creates caution. Caution interrupts emotional openness. You're focusing on getting her attached, instead of becoming emotionally safe enough for attachment to happen naturally. That mindset shift changes everything, because men who constantly seek reassurance often unknowingly communicate internal instability. They monitor her responses obsessively, interpret small changes, emotionally need constant validation to feel secure. And women can feel this long before it's openly discussed. What's actually happening beneath the surface is that she begins sensing emotional weight instead of emotional connection. That's why emotionally grounded men often create stronger attachment without forcing anything aggressively. They don't panic when emotional rhythm changes slightly. They don't collapse emotionally when uncertainty appears. They don't treat every emotional shift like a threat. And psychologically, this creates space. Space for her nervous system to relax. Space for authenticity. Space for bonding to develop naturally, instead of through emotional management. This is also why some women suddenly lose emotional attraction after initially feeling intense chemistry, because chemistry alone cannot sustain emotional safety. A man may be charismatic, attractive, exciting, socially confident, but if emotional volatility appears underneath those traits, her nervous system slowly begins associating him with emotional instability, and emotional instability keeps attachment shallow. This is one of the hardest truths for many men to accept. Being emotionally intense is not the same as being emotionally strong. Real emotional strength is quieter. It appears in regulation, patience, emotional self-control, the ability to remain emotionally present without becoming emotionally reactive. Women bond deeply with men who make emotional closeness feel safe instead of exhausting. That's why some men unintentionally sabotage connection when a woman finally becomes vulnerable. Instead of holding emotional space calmly, they become overwhelmed by the importance of the moment. They overanalyze, overreact, increase emotional pressure because they fear losing the connection. But emotionally, fear-based attachment creates tension, and tension brings her defenses back. Remember this carefully. A bonded woman does not want to feel emotionally trapped inside your need for reassurance. She wants to feel emotionally free enough to move closer naturally. This changes the entire way emotional attraction should be understood, because deep female attachment is rarely built through control. It's built through emotional trust. Trust that her emotions won't be weaponized against her later. Trust that disagreement won't destroy connection instantly. Trust that your emotional state remains internally managed. And once a woman experiences this consistently, something powerful happens psychologically. She stops interacting from defense. She starts interacting from openness. That's the shift most men wait for without understanding how it actually forms. Not through manipulation, not through pretending not to care, not through emotional games, but through emotional steadiness strong enough to make self-protection feel unnecessary. And when that happens, bonding becomes effortless instead of forced. In the end, women rarely bond instantly because of one perfect sentence, one romantic gesture, or one moment of attraction. They bond when their nervous system quietly decides, I no longer need to protect myself here. And that decision happens much deeper than most men realize, because emotional attachment is not just emotional, it's psychological, behavioral, biological. A woman's mind is constantly interpreting emotional environments beneath conscious awareness. She notices tension, emotional inconsistency, hidden pressure, the need to manage someone else's emotions, and when those patterns appear repeatedly, her emotional guard stays active, no matter how strong the attraction seems on the surface. This is why some relationships feel exciting but unstable. There's stimulation, desire, intensity, but very little emotional peace, and eventually emotional exhaustion replaces emotional closeness. What most men never realize is that women often crave emotional relief more than emotional intensity, relief from emotional unpredictability, relief from walking on emotional eggshells, relief from feeling responsible for another person's emotional balance. That relief creates something incredibly powerful: trust, not logical trust alone, nervous system trust. The kind of trust where she stops overthinking every interaction, stops scanning constantly for emotional danger, stops preparing herself for emotional disappointment before it even happens. And once that internal defense softens, bonding starts happening naturally, quietly, without force. This is why the strongest emotional connections often feel strangely calm, not boring. Calm, because emotional safety reduces the need for performance. A bonded woman does not constantly need dramatic reassurance. She begins moving toward emotional closeness naturally because her mind no longer sees connection as emotionally risky. And this is the realization most men miss for years. Women don't always pull away because they lost attraction. Sometimes they pull away because the emotional environment became too heavy, too unstable, or too emotionally demanding. Attraction may still exist, but attachment struggles to grow under emotional pressure. You're focusing on getting emotional reactions instead of creating emotional safety. That difference changes relationships completely, because once a woman associates you with emotional steadiness, your presence starts affecting her emotionally in ways she cannot fully explain logically. She feels calmer around you, more open around you, less defensive around you. And these feelings slowly become attachment, not because you manipulated emotions, not because you mastered techniques, but because your emotional presence stopped activating self-protection inside her. That is the hidden trigger most men never understand. Women bond deeply when emotional closeness feels safe instead of costly. And, ironically, this usually happens when a man stops trying so hard to force emotional outcomes. He stops chasing validation through her reactions, stops panicking over temporary distance, stops treating emotional uncertainty like danger. Instead, he develops emotional self-possession, and emotionally self-possessed men create something rare: psychological stability. That stability allows emotional intimacy to grow without pressure suffocating it, because real connection cannot survive constant emotional control. It needs emotional freedom. Freedom to express emotions honestly, freedom to disagree safely, freedom to exist imperfectly without fear of emotional punishment. This is what women mean when they say someone feels emotionally safe, not weak, not passive, not endlessly agreeable, grounded, emotionally regulated enough that closeness no longer feels dangerous. And once a woman experiences that consistently, attachment often deepens far, far faster than men expect. Not loudly, silently, one conversation at a time, one emotionally safe moment at a time, one moment where she realizes she can finally lower her guard without losing herself. That's when bonding becomes real. And that's why the men who understand female psychology deeply rarely obsess over controlling attraction. They understand something more important. Emotional safety creates emotional permanence. And once you understand that, female behavior starts making far more sense. If this made you see things differently, subscribe, because understanding her mind changes everything.